Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us for today's webcast. I'm Adrian Lee. I'm an editor in the Globe and Mail's opinion section, and I'm looking forward to moderating today's discussions. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that the Globe and Mail headquarters, where I am in right now, is located on the traditional territory of the Wendat, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Métis Nation, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. You don't need me to tell you that technology is developing at an unprecedented pace. Every day, we're seeing huge leaps in hardware and software, giving rise to an often overwhelming array of new solutions and tools for business. Generative AI, cybersecurity tools, cloud computing, these things were once mere ideas and then buzzwords, and now they're must-haves that businesses need to integrate with an enormous market to potentially be won. Today's speakers will be sharing their insights on what they see as the most important areas of investment in the short and the long term. During the last 10 minutes of the panel, we'll be answering audience questions, so feel free to put those in the chat there. And if you have any questions for our panelists, just pop that into that Q&A box. On behalf of the Globe and Mail, I want to recognize NoviPro for supporting today's event. And so let's just get started. Joining me today, we have Louven Alfonso, General Manager of Blair Technology Solutions. We have Viet Vu, Acting Director of Policy and Research at the DAIS think tank at Toronto Metropolitan University, and Angel Yao Vandenberg, Chief Data and Technology Officer for Equite Association. Thanks all for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
Good afternoon.
So I want to start with Viet. Maybe you can set us up with the lay of the land a little bit. What are we talking about when we talk about emerging technologies and the ways that businesses want to integrate them? What does that sort of look like globally and in Canada?
Yeah, very much happy to. And the useful concept that we often talk about when we research this idea is this concept of a hype cycle, right? Because it kind of ebbs and flows. Because if we all remember back in 2016, 2017, there was another moment where everyone got excited about all of these machine learning technologies. And then people suddenly got quiet about it for a couple of years afterwards. And now there's this resurgence because of a release of a series of models that then sort of captured people's imagination. And this imagination is real because we've recently sort of done a survey to actually understand how often people use tools like ChatGPT. And it turns out that about 1 in 3 Canadians have actually interacted or played around with this tool. But that's not what you actually care about at the end of the day with technology, because technology isn't just a toy. It's a tool, right? It has to be used in a very useful context. And so when you're actually looking into meaningful uses of these technology, the number actually shrinks considerably. So people using ChatGPT, I just said 1 in 3 people, so that's just about 30%. But only 4% of Canadians actually use the tool daily. When you look at companies using tools like AI, even though about 14% of Canadian companies say that they're sort of interested in exploring Gen AI as a tool, only about 4% have actually incorporated AI meaningfully in any sort of business function by the beginning of 2022. And some early numbers shows that it hasn't increased by that much in the past 2 years or so. And so it actually remains the case that this technology still doesn't necessarily have a role in everyday life of a business or in everyday functioning of a business, which could legitimately be worrying given potential productivity implications as well. But we're actually still at very much the beginning of the conversation on how to use this technology meaningfully, which is why I think it's actually very important to have conversations like today.
Mm-hmm. So generative AI, of course, is the maybe the buzziest thing we can talk about today. There are other emerging technologies, other advances in other fields, but I think in some ways nothing is as grabby, as sexy, even as generative AI. But when you talk about that hype cycle and that sort of uneven usage by audience base, what are the implications for businesses that want to adopt this? How should they be thinking about it? Whether you're a big company, whether you're a small company, how should you think about adoption?
It's a really great question. And I should also say, right, because it actually remains to be the case, in order to answer this question, you want to understand what companies are not adopting these technologies. And once you sort of ask that question, it becomes quite obvious that large companies are doing just fine. almost 1 in 5 largest companies, so companies with at least 100 employees, use AI in their business. And it's actually the case that most of our adoption problem lies in the small business side of things, where less than, I think, 2% actually adopt any kind of AI in their business function. And when you ask them, okay, why do you not adopt this technology? Why do you not actually use it in your day-to-day business life? The most common answer is that they actually don't see a use for it in their business. They just don't see any potential for AI to actually meaningfully improve how they sort of get customers, how they improve their sales, or how they improve their operations. And I think that's quite silly in the sense that AI isn't just about these sort of frontier technology. It includes so many non-controversial tested solutions that actually allow you to streamline a lot of your business operation. And so I do think education is in particular an important thing, but not necessarily education about the technology. Because technology, again, is just a tool, and businesses don't necessarily care about technology for technology's sake. They're employing technology to solve a business problem that they have. And so it's actually that crucial connection that they're missing on how they can connect that business problem that they're facing every day as business owners to the actual technologies that exist that can help them solve it. And it's that missing sort of translation that I think is the key in solving this problem.
Sure. And then, that question of big versus small business adoption. What do you see as the sort of differences therein?
It's a gulf of difference, right? 20% of large companies having used a form of AI, and the way that they use it is also different. Because when you look at how large companies use AI, they mostly use it for cybersecurity purposes. They mostly use it to protect themselves from foreign attacks. It could be corporate espionage. It could be sort of hackers that are trying to access someone's banking information. Whereas when you look at how small companies use AI, it's mostly for business operations as opposed to anything that has to do with cybersecurity or other sort of means. And there is a world in which, large companies have a lot more data now about everyday consumer. That data is valuable, but also creates a vulnerability that businesses actually need to think about and protect, which can explain some of these differences. But I think we've seen, particularly over the past number of years, with phishing attacks on the rise, with experiences of cybercrime that are actually targeting small businesses, the mom and pop shops, that these risks also exist for these small businesses. And so, again, these are questions that they're probably asking, oh, how do I ensure that when I'm setting up my shop on Shopify, that, my account is not going to get hacked, that my consumer or my customers who are inputting their credit card information, that it is done so securely. And so again, it's that missing link between what the technology exists to solve the problem and the actual problem that these small businesses face.
Right. And I'll take it to Louvain here. You're on the ground of this. I think a lot of folks, because AI has really hit the mainstream, people who either don't engage with AI at all or engage with it on a sort of cursory chat GPT once in a while basis, they have ideas of what AI means for them. From your perspective as someone who is like really on the ground on implementing some of this stuff, how do views on AI vary between sort of technical people like yourself and maybe non-technical people?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, so the technical people obviously they live and breathe this. They are exposed to all the advances and the the amazing things AI brings to the world, and so they know what AI can do from a technology point of view. The non-technical people, not so much, because they're looking at business outcomes, as you mentioned, and they need to understand more what the value add is of AI to their business. And so really what needs to happen is the technical, the IT folks specifically, need to work closer with the line of business folks, decision makers, to understand in their particular industry, in their particular business, how AI could help change and enhance business outcomes for them. So that education is going on. It needs to happen more. One of the points that Viet made is about small companies versus large companies. I think it's safe to say large organizations already have embarked on evaluating AI and how it's going to transform their business, how it's going to help them, how it's going to help them be more efficient, how it's going to help their bottom line. Small organizations clearly, may not have the resources to do that. And when they do the ROI analysis at this stage, and we are still early stages in the AI cycle, they're not seeing the return on investment yet for them. So that'll take some time. There's a lot of companies out there, AI-centric companies, developing solutions for different industries. In time, they will see the benefit and the financial case that AI will present itself to them. But in the meantime, you need to have the uh, discussions and the collaboration between the non-technical and the technical folks to really understand how this is going to impact their business.
And Luven, you've talked about their just bridging the gap between the technical and the non-technical folks. Practically speaking, how do you do that? From certainly my perspective, it feels like there's almost a language barrier there. How do you bridge that gap? Practically speaking, how do you do that education piece?
Yeah, I mean, in a simplified way, I mean, they have to really show them the use cases of AI. They're going to have to show in their particular business how AI is going to help, like I said, increase productivity, potentially automate manual tasks that are being done by other methods today. They need to create an understanding of how the AI solutions directly impact how they go to market, how they deal with processes, how they deliver solutions to their clients. Um, on a different level, they could demonstrate how AI helps them from a cybersecurity point of view, doing and analyzing vast amount of data that needs to be analyzed in order to keep their networks and the environment safe. And so I think if the technical folks are able to break down the solutions with how it impacts the business, I think the line of business decision makers will be in a better position to really understand the value of AI and really how it's going to impact them and how they can see material return and benefits to the business.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll bring it over to Angel now. I mean, I think based on Equité's use of predictive analytics tools, that you guys see the business case. Can you speak to how Equité is using those kinds of tools?
Yes, of course. So we have successfully built and launched our fraud detection and analytics platform called EQ Insights. So this is the first national PNC consortium-based predictive analytics platform to detect and prevent fraud. And this platform will evolve with emerging and changing fraud trends to help our insurance members better identify fraudulent activities earlier. It will also alert on suspicious activity to detect and prevent insurance crime as Equity collaborates with law enforcement and insurance members' investigations. So the industry has a collective goal to mitigate insurance crime in Canada, and the platform will help us identify potential fraud and organized crime rings at an industry level.
Yeah, and so strictly speaking, I don't know if I necessarily see the business case, but how was that sold to you? How was it sold to you to use this kind of technology to advance that for the organization?
So, like Luven alluded to earlier, it is the approach of balancing the predictive analytics and with the human decision making. So while most organizations are using a data-driven approach for fraud detection in particular, I'm a strong believer in the balance of art and science. So investigators and data scientists need to work hand in hand to combat fraud, and that collaboration is the key to our success. So with data mining and predictive models, we are combining data and attributes to explore patterns in a mathematical and scientific way. But there are often insights or trends that require hands-on experience, or the insight from, for example, our investigators that know a behavior of a fraud and what fraud looks like. So then the technology team can use that information, incorporate into the models for fraud detection.
Sorry about that. Yeah, so what then was so that's part of the business case for you. It's just this idea of assisting folks who are already doing that work with trend tools, predictive tools, like you said, the science, right? Yes.
I'm sorry, I just have the something pop up on my thing. I'm sorry about that technical
No, that's all
issue.
good.
So do you mind repeating that question again?
No worries. Yeah, just trying to hone in on what like Luven was saying, communicating the business case is really the key, right? So for Equite, it sounds to me like what you're saying is the business case is assisting folks who are already doing that kind of work, and bringing them sort of additional tools that can make that work easier. Is that right?
Well, is a little bit of both. So different insurance company are already trying to have predictive models or AI to detect fraud, but that is from an opportunistic and exaggerated claims perspective. So they only can see their own data. But what we're building here is like a consortium model. So we have the members, all the insurance members' information, so that you can actually look at who has defrauding, which insurance company, but because of the power of consortium, we can see everything holistically so that we can actually link to what is the crime ring look like, what is the parties involved, and so on and so forth. So I don't believe that, like I mentioned, that this is the very first national PNC consortium model in the industry in Canada.
Right. So I want to hone in a little bit now on cybersecurity. So Luven, I'll come back to you. It sort of seems to me that cybersecurity is something everyone wants. Everyone wants to be secure on the internet as threats grow, but also people kind of don't want to spend money on it, or they spend money on it after it's too late. What? Why do you think that is the case? Why do you think budgets continue to fluctuate despite the sort of many high-profile threats of ransomware and beyond?
Yeah, well, it's the age-old question, right? What sometimes out of sight, out of mind. So when people, think about, and don't get me wrong, cybersecurity is top of mind for everybody, whether it be us personally, whether it be organizations, governments, you name it. Everybody is aware that there are a lot of bad guys out there trying to steal information, trying to get into networks, trying to disrupt. And so, it's one of those things where it is a priority. However, as life goes on, organizations have other priorities as well, namely business related, and so you have competing elements that are competing for budget, and so in some cases, cybersecurity does suffer in terms of the attention and the spending. However, in the last 5 years, what we're seeing is in the last couple of years there is a growth in spending. However, we haven't seen the same level of spending in cybersecurity as we did pre-pandemic. Levels much higher. Spending on uh, security training for employees, for example. People are starting to do that again. So the efforts are being made. It's one of those things where, and I've seen this firsthand. I've seen this with our clients. When you are hit with a cybersecurity attack or a cyber attack, and you've been breached, the amount of money that is spent to remediate and to rectify that can be enormous. And so, the message is really prevention, and you want to make the necessary investments to prevent that from ever happening. Now, nothing's 100%, nothing's perfect. There are ways that a threat actor can find their way into an organization because at the end of the day, there are multitude of ways to get into networks. So all you can do is really make sure that you've got uh, governance, policies, solutions, tools in place to protect your data, protect your network, as best you can. But what we're seeing is certainly, like I said, in the last couple of years, there's been an increase in spending. Our study found that our IT Trends report, surveyed 400 odd customers around across Canada, medium, small, and large companies. The large organizations obviously have a significant amount of their budget dedicated to cybersecurity. What we're seeing is 29% of respondents are planning to invest in security, increase in their investment in security in the next 2 years. Another survey that I've seen found that 69% of IT leaders saw an increase in budget, anywhere between 10 to 100% in 2024. So clearly there is an effort, and like I said, there are enough stories, there's enough information out in the media of different organizations being breached, and so it is top of mind for a lot of organizations, and you're seeing that in budgets increasing accordingly.
Great. Well, that's certainly encouraging numbers in terms of spending trends. Though I also wonder if you can sort of we've talked about it a little bit, but maybe you can go into a little more detail about what we're talking about when we're talking about threat actors. When you talk about there's lots of bad guys, what has changed when it comes to the threats themselves? What are people facing now?
Right. So like anything else, the threats are evolving. These bad actors are organized. They're always looking at new ways and new methods to try and penetrate systems, and so that's evolving. However, for the most part, cryptoware is still the majority of attacks. Phishing continues to be the primary vector of how they get into networks. Things like somebody inadvertently clicking on a link in an email that allows malware onto the network, and once that happens, you're hoping that you've got the tools to detect and stop that, but it happens. So you're seeing a lot of that, but we've been talking about AI for the last 25 minutes. That is one of the evolutions of how the threat actors are changing the attack vector. So they're using AI to enhance. Unfortunately, AI, like anything else, can be used for good and bad, but they're using AI to power all kinds of new ways to get into organizations. So everything from really convincing deepfakes. I'm sure you've heard of that happening lately, as well as malware code. So they're automating their activities in a way that it's making and forcing the technology companies out there to be able to adapt to those new technologies and learn how to defend with them, against them rather.
Yeah, I mean, there was this story that stuck with me from February when a Hong Kong, I believe it was a bank, was attacked to the tune of 25 million through a series of video deepfakes that made it seem
That's right.
like their bosses were approving this massive transaction.
That's right.
So the threat is certainly real. And I'll open this question up to all three of you. Louven talked about the potential for a gap to emerge, that while spending trends are going up, sometimes that's not enough. What is your advice for IT professionals who need better resources for cybersecurity, but may not be getting the buy-in they need from upper management?
Yeah, if I could start with sort of pointing out two things that we see. Well, it's actually one observation and actually a very practical tool that I could offer for help. And so the observation in research is that ICT training that companies offer, not just to ICT sort of professionals, but to the non-ICT staff as well, is positively correlated with adoption of technology. And obviously, I think the magnitude is that, if you're talking about bang for your buck, an increase in spending on training ICT professional tends to have a larger effect. But only up to a point, because you only have so many ICT professionals in an organization, and you always have way more non-ICT professional, and that training them up and actually teaching them ICT skills actually increases organizational uptake of these technologies. And that's sort of what we see in research. And a tool that our colleagues in the university from the Rogers Cybersecurity Catalyst actually created that could actually be conducive to this particular scenario in getting sort of senior leadership buy-in is this idea called a tabletop exercise. And so this, I think, sort of started as a concept in conflict studies, or actually a tabletop game like Dungeons and Dragons, where you're kind of imagining a fictional scenario, a conflict high stress scenario. What if a company experiences a major cybersecurity attack? And it sort of guides you through all of these additional sort of like twists and turns. Oh, it turns out that, this additional thing happened. Oh, it turns out that the person that initiated the attack is actually in another legal jurisdiction, and actually kind of stress test the organization's current response and capability in responding to these sort of crises and these attacks. Because quite frankly, and talking directly, right? We can't be operating in an environment where a company assumes that they're just not going to be attacked, because they will likely at a point absolutely going to be attacked. And so you need to find ways to respond to it. And this exercise, I think we've tested with a whole bunch of companies, and it actually allows senior leadership that, oh, yeah, if this actually happens, we are a little bit we actually don't know how to respond to this. And then that, I think, really prompts a strategic conversation on, okay, what kind of investment do we need to make? What kind of decision do we need to make to ensure that if this happens for real, we won't be fumbling like we did in this sort of tabletop exercise. And it's just, a freely available resource online that you can sort of Google up right now.
Nice. Well then, so how can we do it? And maybe this is Angel and Luven, you can get into this too. So how do you get that without necessarily the training that Viet is talking about? How do you prepare? How do you have these conversations?
Well, I'm not trying to get into too detail about the cybersecurity piece, but cybersecurity is critical, and threat landscapes are continuing to grow. We all know that. So if we just need to help the organization to better understand that having a robust security environment is really important, and that the organization needs to implement security measures prevent from cybersecurity threats. And I agree with Viet that there are certain things like like tabletop exercise, incident response plan, and all those fun stuff that we need to have it so that we are better prepared and prevent from cybersecurity threats. What do you think, Levin?
Yeah, I agree. So, I earlier talked about how you need to have a closer collaboration between your non-technical and your technical folks, your IT and your line of business individuals. So, this applies there too. If the line of business and the non-technical decision makers believe that the IT folks have them covered. Cybersecurity has a budget for the company has a budget for cybersecurity. They're safe. There's no exposures. But if they truly don't understand what the threats are and what else they need to protect themselves from, they're really not going to have a broad appreciation for what they need to invest to protect them properly. So that collaboration with IT is important. I think legislative and insurance requirements will also illustrate and prove to the line of business people that cybersecurity is a serious matter. They need to make the investments required. So as an example, insurance companies that are insuring an organization against a cyber threat or a cyber breach will have a list of requirements that the organization is going to have to prove that they've done, whether it be testing, whether it be tooling, whether it be training, whatever the case is. So those are all investments that a company needs to make. A CEO or a CFO will know about that because they're going to be asked for the funding to be able to accomplish that and prove to the insurance company that they have all the protections in place before they get insured. So there's that. There's legislative changes that are going to force them. Things like Bill C-27, which is obviously not law yet, but when it is going to compel organizations to make sure they have the protections in place to protect people's personal data. In Quebec, you got Law 25 that already does that. That puts the onus on the organization to make sure that they have the protections in place, and if they don't, or if there's a breach, they have to answer to that. So I think a combination of external and internal methods are the only way that organizations are going to, and the decision makers and the line of business are going to understand truly what the investment requirements are to protect their business. And I can tell you, for those companies that have been hit, that have suffered a breach, that have suffered data loss, they will tell. I can guarantee you, they are now spending what they should have been spending before. They probably spent way more just to recover from that. But I think unfortunately, you never wish that on anyone. But like I said, when you haven't been through it, sometimes you feel you have the false sense of security, and unfortunately, it takes convincing, and it takes external pressures to really understand what you need to do.
Mhm. Before we move past this cybersecurity piece, I will just say here as a quick quick promotion, the Globe and Mail's opinion section did publish a long essay from Joe Masudi, formerly of TMU's former leadership lab.
And the day is actually.
Yes, formerly
Yes.
leadership
Yeah.
lab, now the Deus, that I recommend folks read on the threats of ransomware that was published last year. So give that a read by Joe Masudi. And very quickly, another emerging technology I wanted to talk about was cloud computing, and we did have a question from the audience on this. And again, we'll encourage folks to submit their questions in the Q&A box. Their question, and it's going to be for everyone here. What can I do to prevent cloud storage budgets from spiraling out of control? Cloud computing, obviously, it feels like this is an accumulative thing. I can speak only to my own Google Drive to say that's only getting bigger. So how do companies prevent cloud storage budgets from getting away from them?
Yeah, good question. So, from my perspective, obviously, we know cloud costs are they never go down; they always increase. And so, as you consume more, you're spending more. One of the elements that consumes a great deal of that cost is storage. Data is always growing, and data is always increasing. So, um, it's it's a requirement that if you are going to store your data in the cloud, there has to be a process where where you have governance around the data that you're storing, data segmentation, data uh, management, to ensure that the most critical, mission critical data is obviously in on a storage tier that is easily accessible and protected for your mission critical applications. But data that's seldomly accessed, seldomly used, should be archived in a way that it's accessible in a reasonable amount of time. This way, it cut costs. You put it on a tier that's a lot cheaper than primary storage in the cloud, and so you need to have that process and that structure in place that manages and categorizes your data, so you know how to house it and how to deal with it as time goes.
Mm-hmm. Angel, Viet, did you guys have any?
Yeah. So just to provide a little bit of the what we do here as well. So we have a budget. We have the annual budget for the cloud computing and storage, processing fees and whatnot, and security as well. So we just annually revisiting those requirements, those budget to ensure that this is still sufficient going forward as we are processing more and more data, and then we just have to make sure that we have the enough budget for that.
I think the only thing I'll add here, right, is that at the end of the day, there is only so much that a single company, a single CTO, a single CEO can actually do, because the problem of sort of cloud capacity, or what we in the industry call compute capacity, is a systemic thing, right? As sort of these models become more complex, require more data, there's only so many servers and data centers that actually exist, and most of that isn't even in Canada. We actually have a massive constraint in the number of supercomputers that, or computing resources that are publicly accessible, that most of the time when businesses require access to these sort of server or data storage, they actually have the data stored in the States, a server, let's say in Virginia, or even sometimes over in Europe. And so I know that the federal government has just recently announced like $2 billion in fundings to alleviate some of this compute capacity. But I think the concern here is that there's two problems that can actually counteract each other. Because the first problem is that there's a demand problem, which is that there's so much demand for these kinds of resources that the instinct is, oh, how can we subsidize this demand? How can we meet this demand that is there right now? But if you just meet the demand of today without actually building the infrastructure for tomorrow, you're always going to get into the case, kind of like the housing situation that Canada is in, where the prices will increase because supply just isn't increasing, right? And quite frankly, this isn't Canada's game that it can play by itself. Because sure, we can try to build those data centers and servers in Canada, but it requires semiconductor chips. Where do those come from? Oh, that's another problem that we have been talking about for the past 2, 3 years. And the US has been investing heavily in creating these sort of semiconductor chips and then computer chips to actually build these sort of data centers. And so that does, I think, need to be an international effort from a policy level to actually treat this as important infrastructure for economy and invest in it.
Thanks, that was great. I mean, I want to move now to talk about the talent pool, because we've been talking a lot about the technologies, but businesses can't really use these technologies unless they have IT workers. On the other hand, there is a bit of a talent shortage, right? There for technical roles in particular. So again, to the group, what is your advice for attracting, retaining, developing IT talent here in Canada?
Jokingly simple answer, but it's complex. Pay them more. I mean, one of the biggest constraints, so this is our research that we went into, because we hear so often that, oh, hey, we can't compete with American companies that are trying to hire Canadian talents away. And so we wanted to know actually how much that gap was. Because it's an entirely different thing if the pay gap is, let's say, 10% of your salary than if it's something much higher, right? It turns out by moving from Canada to the US, a Canadian tech worker can increase their pay by 50%. 50. It's a staggering amount. And we've control for cost of living, we've control for sort of exchange rate and everything. And it's that massive gap that exists. And quite frankly, that's not something that a small changes in a tax system that is politically and fiscally feasible is actually going to fix. That might fix 1/5 of that gap, but you're still going to be facing 40% of it. And so how do you actually make that happen? And I do think the answer lies in a competitive environment. Canada has a notoriously uncompetitive environment that companies can't grow because it can't actually compete in a fair playing ground. And companies are only able to pay this much and actually compete with American companies if they can grow. And an uncompetitive environment does not allow a tech company in Canada to grow. And so I think the way to actually address it is to tackle the competition landscape to ensure that large companies don't dominate the everyday life of businesses, to actually allow a fair playing field for every company that is innovative, that is productive, to be able to grow and attract the best talent by paying them what they're worth.
Yeah, I'll add to that too from a more holistic level. Employees really need to focus on a few areas when it comes to employee retention and developing the talent they have. So, the focus really should be with employee engagement, workplace culture. Those are all important things to anyone who's working in a particular job. They need to feel especially in today's world where, as we spoke earlier about remote and hybrid, people are working from home or working by themselves, and their only connection to their teams and their colleagues is over Teams or Zoom or a conference call. So employers really need to understand whether they've got the structures in place that keep their employees motivated and valued. So, like I said, employee engagement. Uh, there's a lot of times where employees, especially in larger organizations, feel they're on their own because, again, they're working remotely and they're working for the most part on their own, only connected via technology to the rest of the teams. Things like flexibility, workplace culture, growth opportunities, recognition. Again, collectively they matter. Individually, they have different meanings for different people. But I think the only way you're going to give an employee a feeling that they want to stay and they want to grow with the organization is if all those elements are addressed. And so, then competing with a firm that's willing to offer them a lot more money may not have as much impact if the other parts of their work-life balance are fulfilled.
Right. And then as
Yeah.
far as you talk about engagement, part of this is also about engaging half of the population that in tech spaces are often not, right? I mean, to quote a study by someone named Viet Vu, women are 4 times less or was it 4 times less likely than men to be a tech worker, and the rate has been stagnating for, I believe it's you know better, but for 4 or 5 years now. Angel, can you speak to that just about the way that needs to be part of the conversation here?
Yeah, of course. I often being asked for that question. So I'm a strong believer in diversity and inclusion. So it is no secret, as you mentioned, that the technology industry has traditionally been dominated by men. And while the landscape is changing, so women in positions of leadership need to do our part to mentor and promote not only women, but a diversity of women, particularly in Canada, where we are so multicultural. And despite women making tremendous progress towards increasing their participation in higher education, they're still underrepresented in the STEM fields. So, but however, I'm encouraged to see more and more companies adopting hiring strategies that are focused on diversity and inclusion. The landscape is changing and evolving, and there are more opportunities opening up for high performing and qualified women. In addition, there are more and more women now working in the technology sector and within this industry. So I hope to pave the way for that to continue in the future, continue to have conversations, especially with women early through education. So, as an example, I'm leading a youth group in a local church, my own local church, and my youth group is grade 11, grade 12 young women, and I have openly shared my career journey with them.
And if I could add a little thing to that, right, is there's an extent to which this problem isn't just a woman's problem to solve. And there are absolutely amazing women leaders and tech sort of pioneers who are changing the world every day, but they probably have enough on their plate to do, in addition to having to do all of this stuff. And so that's also a place where men can step up. And I think the challenge here, because I think oftentimes this conversation becomes, oh, but then isn't that sort of unfair? Well, the reality is that there are so many talented colleagues that you could be working with right now, but somehow they aren't in the industry because they're actively choosing outside of the industry for various different factors. It could be partly because of the toxic nature that they often experience. It could be because just the fact that they don't have the other women who are around to be able to form a community and actually feel safe and actualize in their job. And men need to play a role in these initiatives as well. We can't just sort of leave it to the women who are already sort of dealing with so much to also be solving this.
Yeah, and obviously, and Angel, like, I commend you for what you're doing with young women in your church. And I think there needs to be more of that mentorship. I think as women who have worked in the field for a long time can share the experiences, motivate young women that it is a great field to work in. There is, fulfillment. There are great opportunities. I think we need more of that mentorship, and that needs to start again at an organizational level, where people see the value of that and putting into place the processes and the framework to have attract and have people willing to volunteer to be mentors, and then making that available to young women out there to attract them to those jobs. So
Mhm. Yeah. I want to touch on very quickly. I want to touch on upskilling. But before we do, again, we will leave 10 minutes at the end for questions, and we have a couple, so we will ask them. But if you have any more, again, the Q&A box is there for you. So upskilling, we're talking about keeping the current workforce lined up with needs of organizations. That's an important thing for productivity. That's an important thing for businesses. What are, and this is open to the group, what are some strategies for upskilling current talent, and what are some of the skills that uh, should be upskilled?
Yeah,
I,
I'm happy to start. And
yeah.
so for this research, we kind of looked at all job postings that are posted online in Canada to actually understand particularly actually how digital skills are being used alongside non-digital skills. And the key insight that we got from that research was, it sounds obvious at the moment you say it, which is that again, digital tool is just a tool. Thinking about something like Excel, right? You can use Excel to make a budget. You could use Excel to plan your resources. You could use Excel to make it into your contact list. But those are very different uses of that exact same tool and technology. And I think what we've often found is that it's way more effective when there is a clear reason for why someone wants to learn to use a technology, when they're achieving a very particular goal that is relevant to them or their business. And so, again, this is one of those where, sure, I think you can learn a particular tool, but you have to anchor it in an actual use that is a real use case in their business or their work. And so actually involving these workers in conversation, hey, everyone has an annoying part of their job that they don't like. What are those things? Okay, now you've identified them. Let me do a little bit of research into how the current technological tools are there to actually make your life easy on this. And now that I've found this, let's spend a couple of hours and see whether, as you're trying to learn how to use this tool, whether that thing that you found real annoying becomes less so. And that actually improves your life. And so you have to anchor any kind of technical training to an actual sort of non-technical use case that inevitably, I think, ends up being used for.
Yeah, I just want to give my thought. From my perspective, I completely agree with Viet. But from my perspective, I also think it's a balance between intelligence quotient and in emotional intelligence, like the IQ and EQ. Because in the IT world, I'm seeing most individuals have very strong technical backgrounds, but we also need that emotional intelligence as well. So combining the human aspect to technical skills help us evolve as leaders. So, and to anyone on this call looking to make the next step in the career, I would encourage them to investigate in these soft skills.
Great. Luven, any
yeah.
last words on this?
Yeah, in terms of in terms of helping your employees upskill, in the past, people would go out looking for the relevant education, whether the company would pay for it or not. I think on the one hand, organizations need to make sure they have adequate budget to improve to make education and courses and certification upgrades for their employees available, because it's going to benefit them in return, having uh, highly skilled and better knowledge with their folks. Another option is creating a training portal where you can have employees at no charge access all kinds of training material, similar to LinkedIn Learning, but for free of charge. So and there are many of those available out there, to and they could customize them to specific skill sets that they're looking for their staff to have and to upskill on, and make that available, and make it easier for those folks to go and find the education they need to help them improve what they do and personally.
Mhm. We've got a question from the audience that's relevant to the conversation we're having here, which is coming from an upcoming computer engineering graduate. And they ask, what steps should I take to effectively navigate the current job market, build relevant experience, and network with industry professionals to secure a position, despite, we all know about this, the recent volatility in the tech sector? Do folks have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, that's a question I see all the time, especially in today's job market. But I mean, the only advice I have is, you obviously mentioned. I'm looking at the question. So you obviously mentioned everything that you need to be doing. Networking is important. Building up your relevant experience. I think, and I don't mean to sound preachy, but uh, you're doing all the right things. But I think in today's today's market is volatile. It is challenging. As someone who's in the industry, as everyone else in this panel is. Um, all I can say is you just need to be persistent and you need to have patience. And as long as you're doing the right things, you will eventually have success. So, I know there's no easy answer. So that'll be my cop out. But all I can say is you need to have patience. And as long as you continue doing the right things, something will break for you.
Um, I think that one thing the two things I'll add to that. The first is the specific tool that is the most preferred use tool of the day that will change. It used to be, when talking about programming languages, most of it was JavaScript, and from about a decade ago, it became Python, being the dominant language. But at the end of the day, under the hood, they will probably be continued to be object-oriented language. And once you actually learn how object-oriented language, which I think many of the audience knows is a very particular type of programming language, you can generally learn another object-oriented language written in the same philosophy pretty quickly. And so it's really that knowledge area that is important in being able to apply to a vast set of different sets of tools, because the actual exact tool that is going to be used today will probably change even 2 years from now that are being used in industry. And so what will actually prepare you for that is a good enough knowledge of the actual deep mechanics of the thing that underlies the tool. So I think that's number one. Number two, and in a slightly different way, being an economist communicating to a non-economist audience, this is something that I encounter every day. You have to find ways to be able to communicate the technical stuff in a non-technical way so that you don't lose people. And that actually starts with understanding and listening to the actual problem and the actual question that they're asking you, as opposed to jumping straight to a potential solution, right? Because oftentimes the question could legitimately be something quite simple that doesn't need a complicated technical question, but you won't get that unless if you're truly trying to understand where that question is, what they're looking for, and tailoring your answer to someone who just doesn't have the technical language to be able to describe their problem precisely. And so figuring out actually almost a translation exercise, right? If I'm saying this technically, what's the best way to explain this technical thing to someone who has never taken a computer science degree or computer engineering degree? And I think that second thing will be particularly helpful if you're in sort of job market settings, networking settings, and explaining what you do to people who are hiring that can sometimes be non-technical in nature.
Yeah. We only have 5 minutes here, so I'm just going to try to do a speed round to get through all of these and maybe just direct them to one person. And so here's a question I'll have for, I think, Louven. What's your advice for getting company-wide buy-in for using a specific set of tools and using it properly? For example, this is a somewhat wild example, using apps that protect passwords as opposed to sharing them via Slack.
Well, so just that example of sharing passwords, well, you should not be sharing them via Slack. I haven't used Slack personally, but I'm guessing it's probably not an approved and recommended way to share passwords. But again, you need to talk to the experts. Any IT security specialist would tell you you need to have an application when you're sharing passwords that is secure and that is approved and accepted as a way to do that. We use 2 or 3 different applications in our company between our technical teams that are both uh, uh, across all the companies that are part of our group, and it's a highly secure and a highly recommended way of doing that. So
It's the
you just
buy-in that's hard, though, right?
it's the buy-in, yeah. But again, you need to have that expertise on the team or in the company. That's again, creating the governance and the policies that something like this would control. Because it's without it, I mean, who's going to establish that this is a requirement?
Mhm. This next question, I actually don't know who it will be for, so just figure it out amongst yourselves. What role should IT be playing in company strategy? Are IT folks being brought to the table early enough in that strategy process for companies?
Maybe Angel, who probably have battle scars from this.
I was thinking about that. So it is it may be a bit biased coming from an organization is using data and analytics approach to find fraud and work with law enforcement, because the whole company is about data and IT itself. So it's already, we had the advantage that all the discussion, the roadmap, the 3-year strategic roadmap is all evolved around IT, is all evolved around analytics. So it is all often always being considered that like we are constantly evolving, constantly, like as Equity Association is like a startup. We have been in the industry for 3 years, so we're building the ground up. Is more about building the foundation work, and then how we evolve into continuous fine tuning, continue to do more fun stuff in terms of tap into the AI, machine learning, predictive analytics approach. So I'm not too sure if I'm the right person answering that, because the company itself is already very like IT analytics driven.
Yeah. So again, in the study that we ran, this specific uh, item was highlighted, and that is the role of IT in corporate strategy. So it's imperative that IT is part of the process, the process to to make decisions around strategy, identifying opportunities, growth, innovation. So it's imperative that IT should be part of that. It's not always part of that. In large organizations, it is. You have a CIO and a CTO who is at the same table as a CFO and a CEO. So in those cases, IT is embedded in the overall strategy, and the perception of IT and its funding is at the highest level. So small companies, not so much. Again, it depends on the IT structure and what that's made up of. But certainly, IT needs to be part of any organization's
Mhm. This will be
strategy.
the last question. We can do this in 30 seconds, maybe, and maybe this is for Angel. What can, maybe from a manager's perspective, what can be done to help upskill existing IT teams' soft skills?
Yeah, so earlier I alluded to the balance between the IQ and EQ, right? So it seems really like more straightforward to enhance technical skills, and the more the soft skills that we mentioned, like that would be in particular could be communication skills, and to Viet's earlier comment on the finding that technical person, be able to translate all these technical terms to business people. I don't have any, like, in my tool set in terms of with a particular learning and development program, but I'm sure that within the organization, there will be something that it can be offered for the employees, maybe something like the webinars or workshop more focusing on the soft skills, like I can only name like the old days, like the situational leadership skills, or some other more recent. I think it's a I forgot the name of it, but the it's very similar idea. I think it's Kobe assessment and things like that. How you can actually looking at the team. We have a team of people that was different skill sets. Some is just very like to gather information and whatnot. So we just have to maneuver the team environment, making sure that we're all be able to support the employees with the right program.
Great. Well, we do have to leave it there. On behalf of the Globe and Mail, I want to thank Angel, Viet, and Louven for joining us today, and thank everyone in the audience for your questions, and of course, Novi Pro for supporting today's event. We got a link to the recorded webcast in about a week, so thanks again. Enjoy your day.
Thank you. All right.
Thanks very
Thank
much.
you.
Everyone, take care.
Thank you.